24 years of corporate leadership, 8,000 employees that he's responsible for, 4 children, 22 grandchildren, 37 great-grandchildren. It gives me great honor to have Wes Cantrell on today, the former CEO of Lanier Business Products and Lanier Worldwide. So please join us today for that in a few seconds. And also, we just launched our book on Audible. So Amazon, Audible, and iTunes, you can find it. Stick around. We'll be with you in a few seconds. Hello, everybody. Jeff Mason, your host of SimpleBiz360 podcast. We are so honored today to have Mr. Wes Cantrell with us today. Wes, please say hello and tell the folks a little bit about yourself, if you could.
Well, hello, folks. My name is Wes Cantrell, and I'm just delighted to be able to speak to you like this today. I have an amazing career, starting as a technician with Lanier and repairing copiers and dictating machines, winding up as CEO of the same company. A lot of people ask me questions why I never changed jobs. And I said, well, I did change jobs. I just didn't change companies. Nowadays, it's real popular to jump from company to company, and many people do that. And we see that all the time, and they're amazed that I spent all these years with one company, 46 years with the same company. But it was a wonderful ride. We transferred and moved around quite a bit. Each time they promoted me, it seemed like every 2 years, they had another job for me. It was an in-house promotion to a bigger job, and it was a great ride. During that period of time, when I got transferred to Baton Rouge, I met the woman of my dream, a beautiful girl who was 18 years old, and we married when she was 19, and we produced 4 children. We raised them all right there in Atlanta, and now we live in Woodstock, which is a suburb of Atlanta. And of course, my children have multiplied like gangbusters. We have 22 grandchildren and 37 great-grandchildren. They're all over the place. And they're just amazing to me, the stimulation that I get from being around them and kind of being a patriarch to the family there to provide and protect this family. Protection nowadays in this culture for a growing family is a full-time job. And all of you who have families will know exactly what I'm talking about. So it's a wonderful opportunity to address you and speak to you like this. And we're going to talk about a lot of real interesting and sensitive subjects that I had to deal with during my career and how the Bible speaks to each and every one of those. It's a wonderful thing. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thanks so much for being with us, Wes. Folks, you're in for a real treat. And just so if you want to catch us, we're on YouTube. We're on Gab TV, which this will not show up on. It's going to be a little too long. But on a weekly episode, we're on IGTV as well. And then you can catch Wes's interview on 28 listening platforms. So Pandora, iHeart, Google. I mean, you go down the line, Stitcher, Spotify, Apple. So enjoy this. It's going to be a real special episode. And what's the connectivity between Wes and I? It's a very interesting one. I worked for Lanier Business Products out of New York City. I sold dictation equipment in Lower Manhattan, and Wes at that time was the president of Lanier Business Products. And then I'm in a small fraternity. I actually then, in 1992, went over to work for a company called Oxford Industries. And if you go back and look at the lineage of the Lanier brothers, which started Lanier Business Products, really back in, it was back in the 30s, and they actually then bought a part of Oxford Industries in 1942, all 3 of them, and eventually a gentleman named Hicks Lanier branched off from that Oxford trio in 1947, and he went back and really nurtured the Lanier Business Products company in the Atlanta area, and that was Wes's first boss was Hicks Lanier. And when I went to Oxford, my CEO was J. Hicks Lanier, the son of Hicks Lanier. So I'm in a very small fraternity that's worked for both Lanier Business Products and Oxford Industries. They're an apparel manufacturer. Own Tommy Bahama, if that gives you an indication who they are today. And, it's just, there's so much cool stuff. And before I just get into all the questions, Wes, I just want everybody to know Lanier Business Products was a sales machine. Hicks Lanier was an enthusiastic salesman. Lanier brothers had sales in their blood. And you folks at Lanier taught us skills that I know I'm speaking for a lot of us listening today out there that are ex-Lanier employees. We use those business skills to this day on a daily basis. I know I do. I know plenty of others that I've talked to personally that do. So we thank you for that wonderful foundational training that you gave us back then. So without any more to do, I'm so excited about this to let Wes share pearls of wisdom, stories, and just some really cool stuff that I'm sure you'll enjoy. So Wes, without any further to do, let's start. So let's take the audience back to your childhood. Where did you grow up, and what was your family makeup at that point?
I grew up in a little country town called Hiram, Georgia. And back in those days, if you had any money, you had to find somebody who would pay you to do something. And so I was very ambitious and needed money. My parents weren't able to support me with any money that I needed. And so I repaired bicycles, and I bought old bicycles that were scrapped and took them apart and made bicycles, which I sold. I had 2 paper routes. I had the Atlanta Journal and the Atlanta Constitution when we were 2 separate newspapers, one in the morning and one at night. Now, you might say I had what would you call that, where I had a total lock on the market in Hiram. If you got a newspaper in Hiram, you got it from me. I think the federal government made that against the law. But it's the only time in my life I had that kind of an opportunity where if you got a paper, you had to get it from me. And I loved it. It
That's
was a
awesome.
great experience.
That's awesome.
But another thing I did that mystifies a lot of people is I was a chicken catcher. And in that community, there's a lot of chicken houses. And in each house, there's 18,000 chickens. And when they grow up and they're about 12, 15 weeks old, they're ready to go to the processing plant. And somebody has to catch those chickens out of the house and load them in the coops and chip them off. And I took one of those jobs. You're at 3 o'clock in the morning catching 18,000 chickens out of a chicken house and putting them in those coops. And it's a hard job, and you make a lot of money. I was paid $3.50 a night for doing that. What it did for me is it gave me an incredible work ethic, where to me, everything in my life that I connected with, it was like it took hard physical work for it to work, because that's the way I grew up. And of course, in our business, then it's somewhat physical, but also a lot of mental and speech involved in doing the things that we learned how to do as salespeople.
Sure.
So I had this incredible background where, if I was going to have any money, I had to earn it by the School of Hard Knocks. And that transferred right over into my business career and, making cold calls
Sure.
with a copy machine.
Sure.
No problem. Hard work.
Well, that's great. Well, no, thank you for sharing that. So were there any significant events in your childhood, kind of triggers that really started to really plant the seeds of who you would eventually become?
Yes, that's an excellent question. And I received Christ as my Savior when I was about 10 years old. And at that time, as you know, I received the Holy Spirit. And all of those years, he was in my life, sometimes subdued, sometimes repressed, and then sometimes enriched, where I would let him take more and more control over my life. The thing that I noticed mostly about those years is I had this inbuilt warning system that kept me from doing a lot of things that young people do. And so in my life, I grew up without any troubles and problems through my teenage years, because the Lord kept throwing it was almost like I had a referee inside of me that threw a flag if I thought about doing something wrong. And he'd throw the flag also if I did it, of course. But that was very significant in my upbringing, and had a lot to do with my value system and valuing my relationship with him, and also what his word had to say about everything. Because at that time, I had no idea that his word spoke to business like it does.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I learned all of that through actually exercising it.
Well, good. Well, excellent. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. And, that gives us a little bit of insight to that. So folks, what we're going to do is, a little bit about Wes's youth. And now we're going to focus on a book that he wrote called From the Shop Floor to the Top Floor, Releasing the CEO Within. And I read that book, and I drew the questions that we're going to talk about from there, because it really gets you to see a lot about Wes. And I want to park here for a second, Wes, because I really want to encourage young business professionals, if you want to know, how to set the cornerstones of your professional career, you want to know how to set the cornerstone of your life, you want really some good pearls of wisdom on how to do things, let's listen to what Wes has to say. It'll really travel many, many years with you and be very important. So Wes, I want you to focus, if you could, or share, if you could, a unique story you have. And what it really does to me, the story, and you say in your book that it teaches you how to do things exceptionally well. And it kind of set the stage for the rest of your 42-year career by doing this. But it's a famous story you have about a job, I believe Hicks Lanier gave you. Could you share a little bit about that first job you had?
Yeah, that's kind of shocking to a lot of people. But actually, about 2 weeks after I'd gone to work for the company here in Atlanta, they told me to come down to the basement. Now, the basement was a place where we had storage and workshops and things like that. And Mr. Lanier wanted me in the basement. So I went down, of course. And one of the workers there showed me this fishing tackle box that was all open with mud and seaweed and all kinds of stuff in it. He said, Mr. Lanier wants you to clean his fishing tackle. He sunk his boat this weekend, and he wants you to clean up his fishing tackle for him. Well, I'm sitting there saying, cleaning a fishing tackle box, that is not in my job. I just graduated from Southern Polytechnic at the top of my class. I had 5 job offers, and I'm put to this. This doesn't make sense, and I'm having all these thoughts. And then it was like another thought pattern evolved, and that was from my parents. And my parents told me as I was growing up that always you obeyed the authorities in your life. For example, a teacher.
Right.
You were submission to the teacher, the pastor of the church. You submitted. A police officer. It was a pattern of your parents. It was a pattern of submission to those who were in authority. That kicked into my thought process, and I thought, so maybe I should do this, like he says, because he is the boss. In fact, I noticed his signature on the check that I got every 2 weeks. I go, I like that. And so I decided to clean his tackle. And not only did I clean it, but I took it over to a wash basin and cleaned it out and got it all completely clean, took all the lures and everything and polished them. And when he got it back, it looked better than it did when he bought it at Kmart. Yeah. So it was wherever he bought it. So it was, he received that really well. I didn't say anything, but I believe that it with him particularly, it marked the rest of my career, because in all kinds of deals that I had to make, I could tell that he had great confidence in me, even though he didn't display much confidence in anybody, because he was a very self-confident man. Still with me, it was always like whatever I said was okay with him. And I know when we were building the Baton Rouge office, I came up to show him the plans for the Baton Rouge office, and Bernadine was with me, and she was sitting out in the foyer. And as I came in, he said, Wes, didn't I see some woman out there with you? And I said, oh, yes, Miss Lanier, is my wife, Bernadine. He said, get her in here. She knows a lot more about building these buildings than me and you. And that just showed his tremendous humility, but he really understood the input of a woman into anything that you're designing, how she can really see through a lot of things that us men just flat miss.
Yeah.
Good illustration of how a woman is designed to complete the man. Oh. And a great illustration there. But
agreed.
I think that fishing tackle story probably was a make or break for me. I think if I hadn't done it, I would not have made it. I would have changed jobs probably.
I think it's so, it's just so, it's such bedrock to the man you became in business, because it exercised humility, it exercised, submitting to authority and just doing what you were asked to do. But I love how you say in your book that it also just taught you how to make sure that you did things exceptionally well. And that was certainly a hallmark of you. It is a hallmark of you, and going forward. So you say something very interesting in the book, and I want you to touch on this. And I know it was a core component to Lanier Business Products too, but your quote was, all development is self-development. Could you just elaborate on that for us?
Yes, it was a key breakthrough for me, really discovering that, because when I became a manager of the Baton Rouge office, I had no management experience. I used the illustration, I think, I'm not sure I used it in the book, but I have used the illustration of being a catcher on a baseball team, and the owners of the team sell out to a hockey team, and now you're going to be a goalie, and now you're a goalie and you don't know how to skate. And it'd be a little difficult.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the illustration that I used. And I had no idea about what I was supposed to do. Also, I had a boss that didn't like me down there, and his culture was completely different from mine. And just everything about it was hard. It was so hard, I'd actually begun to look for another job. And I hate to admit it to all my fellow employees, but I actually interviewed with Xerox, which is, like going into the enemy's camp. So I didn't get offered a job. I don't think they liked me. So, oh no, I did not get offered a job, but I wouldn't have taken it anyway. But at any rate, as a result of going to 3M, to one of their management development schools, they had this professor, and he lectured us on how you're responsible for your own development. He's basically saying, if you're in a job and you don't have an MBA, then you need to get the equivalent of a job. And if it's a big thing with the company where they have it on their checklist, then you go get an MBA. You can get one on the weekend, doing weekends and all that kind of
Sure.
stuff. If you read books or you have consultants or people that you trust that know how to do things, you can get help from them, but you develop yourself. You develop the skills that you need. You're not just going to sit there and cry and say, woe is me.
Yeah.
Look what I've been dealt this terrible hand. But you figure out how to do it. And in the process of developing yourself, it becomes an ongoing process. It never stops.
Yeah.
You'll be developing yourself from this point forward. And you never really feel like I have arrived. One of the problems in business is you have a real successful quarter, a real successful month, and you think, that's it, man, I've reached the epitome. No, you haven't.
Yeah.
There's still going to be other reaches that you have to do. And I learned that over and over and over again. So the idea of all development being self-development, it's not something somebody else does to you. It's something you do to yourself intentionally.
Yeah.
Very important thing.
Yeah. Thank you for illuminating that. And certainly, as I mentioned, it was a core component at Lanier Business Products. And I remember my regional manager, Terry McManus, who many of us remember fondly. He pulled me aside one day and said, hey, do you want to develop further? Do you want to become a better professional? I said, yeah. He says, well, read a business book a month. And from that business book, take at least 3 things, a minimum of 3 things out of that book. And at the end of the year, you're going to have 36 new arrows in your quiver to do business with. And just think, so, and it was just, but it was that ongoing observe, absorb, look at situational, situations through a lens of observation and learn something from that so you can take it to the next situation. So I applaud you for highlighting that. And young folks out there, that's really we encourage you to have a thirst for that continuous improvement process, if you will. So thank you so much for that. And Wes, in line with that, you also talk about having a teachable attitude and about the role of humility as it relates to improvement. I know it kind of goes hand in hand with what you just said, but is there anything you want to share or add about teachable, attitudes and humility?
I think from the start of my career there, you see, I submitted myself, and Mr. Lanier learned that I didn't think I knew it all, that I was teachable. And I think that was valuable to him. And later on in my career, I began to see just how being teachable all the time, never thinking that you have arrived, always continuing to study and grow and learn new things. So important in business, because if you don't, one day you wake up and the whole world has just left you behind. And at Lanier, our products were changing. And as I got into higher level positions, I was really very involved in product development for the future and product selection for the future. And that became really important because everything was changing so rapidly. And we had to be sure we had the right products for our customers, or otherwise our sales force would be hard pressed to sell products that were not state of the art. So just a lot of the idea of not ever arriving, continuing to improve, continuing to. There's a Japanese word, by the way, it's called kaizen, which means continuous improvement. And working with the Japanese, I really learned that because they were so good at that. I mean, I loved working with the Japanese.
Yeah,
Kaizen.
they've really shared that in the automobile industry here as well too, in large ways. Yeah, awesome.
Did they ever?
Yeah. So very good. So, I appreciate you talking about that a little bit. And I think that a lot of coaches talk about the benefits of failure as it relates to success. What's your take? Because I know you speak about it in the book, but what's your take on the role of failure in becoming more successful?
Well, I think failure is kind of like hitting the wall. It's like in life in general, things happen where everything that you thought was going to happen in the future is all of a sudden closed out. It's not going to happen.
Right.
One of the greatest illustrations I have of that right now in my life is losing my wife, because I never anticipated that she would die as young as she was. She was only 82. And that's called hitting the wall. So you have to figure out, what do I do next? What's my job? And that's happening to me even right now as we speak. But particularly in business, you hit the wall. And when you hit the wall, that's failure. What do you do? And, typically most of us want to escape. And so we change jobs, which you take the problems that you have with you to a new job.
Yeah.
Or you get a divorce, or you start maybe trying to get relief by drinking or something like that. And we see all kinds of people respond to failure in different ways, but it's always based on trying to escape whatever it is. But the answer is to find out what God has in mind for you in the future and go with it with a whole heart. He is not for failure. He is for winning. And he will give you the strength and the courage to do exactly what you need to do when you trust him. And that's what I learned the hard way. And it's hard to get that in the heads of people so often, because you're often they're turned to other ways of getting relief.
Yes. And
failure is such a great platform for that thing in Baton Rouge when I was failing so desperately. That the success that came out of that is beyond measure.
Yeah.
Like we just leaped off the pages. We were so successful.
Yeah. Well,
and it was all the hand of the Lord blessing us and blessing the behaviors that we had learned.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And, folks, just to let you know, this myself included, here I work for Wesley Cantrell and Lanier. I certainly excelled there. And it was 1987. I go to another company, excelled in that company for 4 years, became a Christian in 1987. Yet, in 1992, here I am in a parking lot in Berwyn, Pennsylvania, Paoli, Pennsylvania, after I sold my last $100 worth of Pittsburgh Pirate baseball cards. And I remember going down the elevator and I was dead broke. I was going down the elevator. I went into my car. I sat in my car, began to cry. Why did all this happen to me? Because I took a risk with my dad as an entrepreneur. We put everything into the company, and I had to leave the company, and I had just exhausted every financial avenue I had. And I went to sell my baseball card collections, and that was the last of my collection. So here I am, 8 years after starting work with the company that you were president of at that time, learned all these great skills, became a Christian. Life isn't perfect, right? You have hardships. And the failure was, here I was, how I'm crying in a parking lot, no money, zero money, 1992, 2 kids, 2 young girls. What do I do? And, it's those moments in life where you have to draw on your faith and you have to draw on your inspiration to get back up after the curveball. Look at failure as a teachable, as a vast array of teachable lessons that you can take on to the next venture. Glad to say I've been, running a company for the last 15 years. And so, praise God, right? I mean, but, the point is failure was essential to that. So I appreciate you illuminating that, and I wanted to spend some time myself on that because it's a big part of my story. And a funny thing is, I was in charge of the benevolence committee at church in 1992, and so I had this. I got everybody on board. Let's do a food closet for people that are have run out of food. Do you know who got the first 2 bags delivered to them out of the food closet? myself and my wife, and we sat there, Wes, when they delivered the pasta and the canned goods. I mean, we just stood there in our hallway in our foyer and cried. I mean, what else could you do? It was so humbling. Yeah. But you know what? You just keep, thankfully we got up and we went to bat again. We took another swing, and that's what you keep doing. So excellent. Now, you mentioned something in your book that I really think is fascinating, and it's about your reaction to leaders that lead in a negative way. And I want to park on this for a second, because we hear, if you really go into the belly of marriage counseling and you really understand the main contributor to bad marriages, a lot of times it comes out that it's the response of one of the spouses to what the other spouse says or does. It's not so much what they're doing, it's their response to it in a lot of ways. And you made some interesting illustrations in the book, talked about it. We all run into leaders we don't admire, we don't like, their value systems don't line up with ours, they don't align with us, individually. But yet we have to work for them. We have to, as you said before, submit to that authority. But most interestingly, you said be cautionary about reacting negatively to those leaders. Could you talk about the reaction that you speak of?
Yeah, a lot of that practice came from working with my boss, who had a lot of really strong ideas. And I viewed my job as, this is when I'm the president, he's the CEO, and I viewed my job as helping him be successful. And whenever he would give me some idea that I thought was not going to work, it was real treacherous, because if I confronted him, he didn't take that very well. And I don't blame him.
Sure.
But what I had to learn to do is to give what I would call a creative alternative, where you would say, well, Gene, here's an idea that I have. See what you think of it. And you tell him a better way to do what he wants to do. It accomplishes the same thing, but it avoids the problems or the pitfalls that are built into it. And I found that in many cases he bought it. But if I just said to him, that's wrong, we can't do it that way, I was going to be out the door. So I think the idea of reacting that way positively, and also another thing that I learned is that he expected, if he had an idea, a quick decision. He was a shoot from the hip kind of quick draw guy, and he wanted me to say, yeah, let's go do that. But if I had qualms about it, I would say to him, would it be okay if I slept on this? And he would say, okay. Now, sleeping on that, in my vernacular, I was going to pray about it.
Sure.
And pray about the decision. And Gene, the vernacular that he liked was sleeping on it, and that worked. And even though he was shoot from the hip, sometimes he'd say he wanted to know when I was going to give him my thoughts.
Sure.
I had to tell him the time. So I'd say, I'll see you tomorrow morning at 9:00, and I'll tell you what I think. And so it gave me time to create a creative idea and to speak to the Lord about it and get his input. And that, of course, is perfect in every case. And that's how we did it. And that would work in any situation where you're being told by a boss to do things that instinctively are just not going to work.
Yeah. So, I love that measured approach. I love that cautionary approach you have, where you don't just, fly off the handle and give your opinion or your point of view. You really let it bake in prayer and time and patience, right?
Right.
Which
exactly.
I think is great. And so Gene Milner, which Wes is referring to, Gene at the time, Wes became president of Lanier in 1977. But before that, Gene Milner had been president, and then I guess a CEO. And so Gene was the CEO when you were president in many cases, right? And he was the president when you were a district manager, a regional manager, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
So Gene, two different value systems in a lot of ways, very dynamic salespeople, both of you in your own right, and but different. And Gene could be, it could be oil and water. And I hope I'm not paraphrasing incorrectly, but it seemed like that. And so these reactions to leadership choices, I think, are a message to anyone listening. Your grandkids, your great-grandkids, church members, and anybody listening in cyberspace, man, just make sure you don't say something you don't want to. Just, let some time get in between you and your reaction to that, correct?
Yes. Yeah, you have to learn that, we used to say if you win the argument and lose the sale.
Yeah.
And this whole thing is like it's an archetype of sales methoding where a customer gives you an objection and you give a creative alternative to it. It's a very valid sales approach. I would not want to tell Gene I was trying to sell him on anything because that would turn him off, although he was a consummate salesman. But he appreciated the time and effort that you put into thinking. And there were many cases where he would come to me, he'd come down to my office and say, Wes, I want to ask your opinion on something. And I would tell him, and he'd say, great, and walk out. Yeah. And he would do exactly what I said. Yeah. And when we bought the first mainframe computer, which was a huge decision for us, it was long in about the same years, he actually said to me, Wes, I think you have a deeper understanding of this technology. I would like you to pick the final vendor that we're going to go with and hire a guy to head up the department. So I did all of that. And it just showed how much confidence he had in me. I think that filtered down from the episodes with Hicks and others that I'd had with him. But when he saw that, I think the big thing with him was probably when I fired the top salesman in the company. That was big news.
Well, let's talk about this, because that was my next question. I mean, we got to segue into that. So, folks, listen, this is a great story. Wes through, really thinking through it, praying through it, obviously, but he ends up firing the top salesman in his region. Tell us how this happens and what happens next. I love it.
Well, Bill, the top salesman of the company, and I had been promoted back to Baton Rouge as district manager. It's the job I didn't know how to do, of course. But there was a guy there who was top salesman in the company, and he thought he should have gotten the job. And I didn't know. I mean, the guy's productive. He as a salesman, he used a lot of techniques I didn't approve of, like lying to the customer, and we had to go back and do a lot of patching behind him. But you could say, well, he was kind of worth it because he was really producing a lot. And but I found out that behind the scenes, he was manipulating against me, still thinking probably if he could get me fired, he would get the job. That's probably what he thought. And he, a lot of times at a meeting, he would take the guys around the corner for a beer, and he would tell them how stupid I was. And so I had one guy that worked in the organization that told me, he said, Wes, you really need to know what this guy's doing. And he told me about that. And I said, wow, now I understand why it always seemed like I was swimming against the current. Mm. And so I decided, after going to that management school, I decided that disloyalty was an intolerable offense. You could not have somebody who was intentionally in disloyalty. So I made the decision to fire him. So I came back to Baton Rouge, and he had once a trip to New York, and he was all elated by then. He comes in my office, and I said, Sandy, had a good time in New York, right? Well, it's your last one was Lanier. Get your stuff together and get out of here. Get all your stuff packed up and get out of here. And he looked at me like he couldn't believe it, but he left. And of course, as you might imagine, sweet flavors wafted throughout the entire company because everybody disliked him. But they needed to know that I was really in charge. And so when I fired him, that gave them the clue that I was really in charge. But then I was concerned about the fact that I fired him without consulting with my boss. That's Gene Milner. And so I'm sitting there, and about 3 days later, phone rings, and Joe walks in and says, Wes, it's Gene Milner on the phone for you. I said, oh boy, this is going to be it. So he says, hello, Wes. He said, I heard that you fired that SOB. And he said, I always knew that you'd have to fire him, but I waited. I wasn't going to tell you. I waited till you got your guts together and did it. And he said, today you became a man, my boy. How about that?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
That was a great, I mean, I was so relieved because I thought, fire the top salesman of the company. I mean, I thought he's going to fire me. Yeah.
Well, and share with us how high up the productivity of that office went after that.
After that, it was like the office was on fire, and we just blew the socks off of everything. The sales that year from the previous year were over double, and that didn't last very long because they called me and asked me to come up to Baton Rouge, to Atlanta to talk.
Yeah.
And I went up to Atlanta to talk. And what they talked to me about is I was moving back to Atlanta to be in charge of the entire dictating equipment division of the company. There were two divisions, copiers and dictating at that time.
Right.
It was a big promotion, moving back to Atlanta. I came back to Atlanta and I sat down with Bernadine. I said, honey, we had 3 children at that time, and number 4 was in the oven. Little Julie was about to be born. And so she said, she'd been telling me the house was too small. And I said, honey, I've got some really great news for you. I'm going to get you that new house that you want. It's going to be bigger and better. It's going to really fit all of our needs. And I said, there's just one little piece that you need to understand. That house is going to be in Atlanta and not in Baton Rouge. Now, my wife, she was a champion. And every promotion I got, she was behind it 100%. I ran into a lot of guys when I promoted them. They had wives that were crying and screaming and not wanting to leave their mothers. And I understand that. And I'm sympathetic with it. But still, in all, to have a wife who supported my career like that is amazing. Yeah. I mean, she would say to me, every 2 years, I just put all, she said, should I unpack the things this time? Because you're going to be moved in 2 years. Should I unpack or just leave them packed? I would say, well, honey, you know what I know. I mean, I don't know what this crazy company's going to do with me. But if we get a promotion, it's a good promotion for the career. I think it'd be good. And I would say also, it dawned on me that God has a plan for us to be in all these different places. And I look back on it and see what we learned in each location. Yeah. Gulfport, Mississippi, Augusta, Georgia, Baton Rouge, and then back to Atlanta. In each place, it was a period of major growth, both emotionally and spiritually, and in terms of skills of running the business, great periods of growth. So he had in mind something in every one of those locations. And so I'd just say, to emphasize the fact that I married a really good woman who encouraged me in those relocations as compared to some people that I dealt with where I actually met with the wives and they cried, and they didn't want to go, and took a lot of selling. And I reached the conclusion, Jeff, that I really didn't want to move somebody somewhere where God didn't want them. Sure. So part of what I was trying to find out is if God wants that person to be in Waxahachie, Texas, then I'll talk to him about it and see what he does. Yeah. Instead of trying to push them or make them go or threaten them by never getting another promotion, those kind of threats are used. I decided not to do that, but to just gently say, here's what we have and here's what we'd like you to do. Well, so all of that came out of that episode, Yeah.
I mean, look at that, folks, and some great, thank you so much, Wes. Some great takeaways here. But I think really, if you're a young business professional, you're a young leader, you really understand there's deception that's being practiced in your midst amongst your, associates that report to you. If there's undermining that's going on, if there's things that are there that are inappropriate. Here's a great lesson to take away in listening to a man explain that he stepped out and did what was right, no matter if the guy was or gal was, the top performer, which this gentleman was. But not only did the productivity accelerate to the point of grew 400% from when this gentleman was there, but got the call from the CEO, got the invite up to Atlanta to get a bigger job. And the message I want to make sure that sends, Wes, to the young people listening is it's okay to manage by your convictions, and character matters. And character, you say in your book, you mention character over currency. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's really what it has to do with the focus of your life. Is your life focused on money, just making money? And if it is, that's the currency. You're going to do a lot of bad things probably because you do workarounds and cut corners. But if you focus on developing your character, that is the goodness and the obedience that comes from a personal character, dependability. Gene Milner once called me Mr. Dependable. That's probably the best compliment he ever gave me, because he didn't give very many compliments. He was more a kicking in the backside kind of a guy, Interesting. But he did tell me one time, or he referred to me in one speech that he made as Mr. Dependable. So that character means that you can judge exactly what a guy is going to do in the future. based on behavior of the past. And it's very wonderful to do that because in promotion, if you move them somewhere, they're still going to get their best effort.
Yeah.
And it's going to be honest, and they're not going to make you think or try to make you think that they're doing better than they are when the facts will speak for themselves. So in that whole thing, character over currency, I'm writing about the selection of people and the promotion of people and the recruitment of new sales reps and how important it is to determine the character of the individual rather than their sales ability, because the sales ability can be built on good character, but it can't be built on poor character. Yeah. It's going to be self-destructive. And I looked at in the book, I looked at the characteristics of the big leaders that are listed in the Bible, and like the characteristics of pastors and deacons and things like that are listed in the scripture. And I looked to see, is character there? And I'm doing this from memory, but the best I can remember that for a pastor, teacher, there were 9 qualifications, and of the 9, 7 of them were character.
Yeah.
That gives you more than a clue. It gives you an absolute picture of what works in business. The old man that founded Chick-fil-A here in Atlanta, Truett Cathy,
sure,
a good friend of mine, and they spend more time in their recruiting process on character and determining the character of an individual than any other thing.
Yeah.
And Truett was a great God-fearing man, a wonderful man, a good friend of mine. And he was the guy that really made Chick-fil-A known for its customer service and its love of its customers with not only good performance, but also with a great product.
Yeah.
In fact, one time I was in a meeting with him and with some other businessmen, they're talking about various things. He said, they said, "What's the most important thing in your business, Mr. Cathy?" And he said, "That's real easy. The food needs to taste good." Isn't that a great simplification?
That is. I mean, seriously.
The food needs to taste good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how monumental is that? It's pretty basic.
That is huge. But I got some of my ideas about putting the customer first from Truett, but really it came, maybe there's another time you want me to talk about it when the light went on in my head of what I wanted the company to be if I became CEO.
Yeah, no, I'd love to spend time on that, and because you're leaning into something that is my epicenter, and my epicenter, going back to 1988, Wes, I read a TARP study that illuminated what happened to people when they had bad buying experiences, and so I became infatuated and thirsty and hungry for learning more about the point of view of the customer through their lens. How was that business buying transaction experience perceived by the actual customer? And so I started focusing on the customer experience before it was a phrase, before it was a term, back in 1988. That's what my book is about. That's what my consulting company is about. It's about improving the customer experiences. And so you are now, by the way, I have to say something, a cool fact I found out just recently. You were appointed president of Lanier in 1977. J. Hicks Lanier, the son of your first boss, was appointed president of Oxford Industries in 1977. Kind of cool, huh? It's pretty cool. So anyway, but I wanted to say that, you developed over time this idea about putting the customer first. You ended up calling it customer vision, and you rolled this out. Could you elaborate on that whole emphasis, if you will?
Mm-hmm. I'd love to. That's one of my favorite subjects. I was sitting in a seminar here in Atlanta one time back when I believe I was president of the company or below that, and the speaker said, Proverbs 22:1 in the Bible says, a good name is rather to be chosen than great riches. And so he said, the speaker, he said, what a great way to build a great business, to build it on the basis of having a good name. And you choose, every time you choose, if it's going to cost money, you spend the money to have a good name. So I'm sitting there in this thing and my mind is whirling and I'm saying, boy, I love this thought. And I thought back to growing up as a kid, my paper routes and everything, and how I tried to make the customer happy by instead of throwing their paper in the front yard, putting behind the screen door. I did a lot of stuff like that because to make the customers happy. So I had kind of a natural instinct to do that, knowing it was better for business. But reading that scripture, I'm sitting there and I'm saying, if I get the chance sometime in the future to be the head of Lanier, I will refocus this company on the customer. Not that it wasn't focused on the customer to some degree, but the focus of the company was more on the sales force than on the customer.
Right.
Not bad,
right?
But just not the absolute focus. So then the time came when I became CEO, and at that time we had the Harris 3M company, which was part of what had happened with the joint venture with Harris, and we had acquired all those pieces, and all of a sudden we had Lanier Worldwide. And in the room, I had guys from Europe, and I had guys from Latin America. I had guys from Harris Corporation. I had guys from 3M Company, and I had guys from Lanier. I go, okay, so we're going to put together a strategic purpose for the company. And we spent 2 days off in the woods and talking about everything. And I did not hire a facilitator on purpose because I was new as the CEO. And I had all these different guys I didn't even know that we had together. And I thought this would be my chance to really become their leader and see me in action. So I decided to facilitate the meeting personally. I did. And in that meeting, we focused around, we did strengths and weaknesses, of course, which was a normal thing you do, the SWOTs, put them up on the chalkboard, we'll talk about all that. And out of that, we saw that we had this one tremendous strength. And the strength that we had was a customer service organization that was taking care of the customers on a daily basis. Usually the product's not working, CSR shows up and he fixes it. And he has a great relationship with the customer. So we talked about that, and without me putting a lot of English on the decision, we decided as a group universally that we would be the best in customer satisfaction in the copier business. And when you make a decision like that, it's really important that that decision is implemented. It's like in every business, you've got the flavor of the month. The CEO gets up and says, here's what we're going to do. And everybody kind of laughs and said, yeah, this is the flavor of the month. What are we going to do next month? What's it going to be? Knowing that, you know that you said, we've got to make a big splash. They have to understand that we mean this. And that means that you got to spend some money. So we did spend some money, and we did research on copier satisfaction. We found out, by the way, that satisfaction with copiers across the United States was only 47%. Only 47% liked the copier they had. We found out that Xerox was worse than us, which was good news because we were about 48% at that time. But without me spending a lot of time elaborating on all that we did, the training, the things that we changed, the awards that we gave, I could go into all of that. Yeah. But in long story short, is we got our customer satisfaction up in a couple of years. We were in the 90s. Yeah. And after I retired, 2 years, we won the J.D. Power Award for being best in copier service. And the guys hoping Lanier would call me and laugh and say, Wes, we had to wait till you retired to win this award.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Well, you led him up to it,
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
It was a wonderful thing and a great experience.
Well, and folks,
I think it was so good for the employees because in the past, all of our attention was on the sales force and it stayed there.
Sure.
But now all of our attention really was focused on the customer. Do they like us? Will they buy from us again? And when I presented that to the board of directors, they were not all that impressed until I explained to them that if the customers like you, every copier is replaced on an average of 18 months. Yeah. And so they're going to replace with you and they're going to recommend you to their friends, and it's going to cause great growth in the business. Yeah. Now that the board of directors could understand. They didn't understand some of my vernacular on the customer satisfaction. I'm not sure. The problem with boards is, on a public company, is they're only interested in the value of stock.
Right.
And
Right.
So if it doesn't improve the value of the stock, they're not that interested by and large. That's my experience. There are exceptions to that, of course.
Well, I think you're speaking to a time in our world, and especially here in the American business economy. We know this is an experience economy. A lot of success is measured by the customers, not in the product itself, not in the fact that the Chick-fil-A food tastes great and things like that. It's on the fact of how was the experience, how was I treated, how did they make me feel, and right or wrong, that's where we are, it seems, and right. That's why. What I do is such a neat aspect of business now, because I'm playing into that and learning that customer vision matters. And in fact, folks, I want to give you some empirical data here that Wes draws out in his book. And by the way, we're going to have links to both of Wes's books and his wife's books. His wife was Bernadine, and sorry for her passing. I meant to mention that earlier, but we, thoughts and prayers are still with you guys. And but she was an author in her own right, and she had some really cool stuff to say, which I think we're going to get to one later. But really, we want to take a look at something you said in the book about when it came down to getting that J.D. Powers Award. And I hope I can say this because it's in the book, but as a seller of copiers, you had another manufacturer making those copiers. It's called the private label business. I mean, that's what it is. So you had Toshiba making a lot of the copiers at the time you win this award. And Toshiba came in ninth in this because they sell their own copiers. They came in ninth in the study. You guys came in first. So it showed that, even though the product was very similar, had different little stickers on it and labels and was called something different, it was a Cajun term you fell in love with in your time in Baton Rouge. And I hope I'm saying this right. Excuse me, Louisianians. Lanyap, is that right? Is that how you say it?
That's close. I would say lanyap.
Lanyap. Okay. Okay. Explain what that term is and how it played into customer vision here. I think it's great.
It just means a little something extra for nothing. In other words, the first way I heard the expression is I bought a suit in Baton Rouge, and that's back when we used to wear suits to work, by the way. Some people seeing this will remember that.
Absolutely.
I wore a suit every day. And I bought a suit, and as I was leaving, the guy said, "Here's a tie for you." And I said, "Oh, I'm not buying anything else." He said, "No, this is lanyap." And I said, "Lanyap?" And he said, "Yeah, we just throw this in for nothing. It's something for you extra, just because we like your business and we'd like to have it again." And so I thought, wow, what a great term that is. So what we did in services, in all of our services, we did more than the customer required to make them happy. And a great example of that was in the copier business, where customer satisfaction related largely to the quality of the copy. Is it sharp black on clear white background, or is it fuzzy or smoky or whatever,
Yeah.
And you got to spend a little extra money on the copier to keep it delivering real crisp copies. It means back in those days, it required replacing the drum, not rubbing out the drum, but replacing the drum, which costs money.
Sure.
And we decided to do that in every case. Just a little example. And you could refer to that to lanyap. You could refer to it that way because the customer didn't pay any extra for that. They just got it because we decided we're going to keep the quality of their copies up so good that they have no reason to trade with somebody else in 18 months. And it worked beautifully.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. So that really made your difference between number 1 and number 9 is you gave the customers extra things. And, here at SimpleBiz360, Wes, I know we haven't talked a lot about my side of the fence personally, but, what we do is we talk about customer needs, customer wants, but then there's this ideology of serve to deserve. And if you can give customers what they deserve, and if you can take it to that next level, you're giving that. Excuse me again. I keep wanting to say lanyap. What is it again? Lanyap.
Lanyap, yeah. Lanyap's close enough.
Okay, so you're giving that to them without me knowing this Cajun term. I'm giving that to them and suggesting that that's where we really get the bevy of great referrals and repeat businesses when we can give the customers what they deserve because we understand what they need and want, but now we're giving them that something extra they didn't ask for. They didn't pester us for it. So if any of you guys want my book or want to know about my business, that's what I focus on. That's what, I call it I call it, overlooked and ignored business principles rooted in common sense. And it's just, it's a wonderful concept to try to serve to that deserve level. So little plug for SimpleBiz360 in the midst of this. But so you're a God-fearing man. You accepted Christ at 10 years old. You operate, Jesus is your CEO in essence. God is your CEO for forever. But you have a phenomenal lesson that you share in the book that's Christ-centered, and I want you to talk about it. And if I'm recalling this correctly, I believe you were in the World Trade Center on a floor when this came about. And I want you to speak about the AFCA acquisition, if you could, and what happened in that room, what happened after that. If you could explain it, be great.
Okay. Yeah. First,
AGFA.
we first went public. Oh, you want to do that?
No, it's the AGFA, right? So it's the AGFA. Yeah, I had it wrong. I called it AFCA. Sorry about that.
AGFA is when the European company AGFA had a copier business, and they decided to sell it. And we looked at it and we thought it would be a good fit for our operation in Europe. And by the way, if you want a wake-up call on business practices and you go to Europe, you'd like to see all the anti-business laws that you could imagine are all heaped up in one, particularly in the country of France. I don't mean to knock France because I love their food and they got a lot of good-looking girls there, but their laws about business are horrible. You cannot own a business there. And so anyway, we thought the AGFA acquisition would help us with all of that. So we went down to Harris, owned us at that time. I went down to Harris, we talked to them about it. And the boss down there said to me, he said, Wes, if you want to move forward with this, I'll leave that decision in your hands. But there's less than 5% chance I would approve this if you decide to go forward. And of course, around the table there is all these MBAs, the staff, sometimes referred to as a staff infection. So I immediately said, without even hardly thinking, okay, we'll go forward. And they all fainted because they thought 5%, nobody would go for that. But to me, 5% was pretty good. The way my mind worked, I thought, if I make 20 sales calls, I'll sell one every time. Every time I make 20 sales calls, one I'm going to buy. So it was, to me, that was good news.
Yeah.
That's good odds. 20 calls.
Wow. 5%. Yeah. Not many people would look at that, but go ahead. Yeah. Great.
Yeah. That's the way, that is exactly what went in my mind. 5%, that's good odds. We'll do it. Well, David Marini was the European manager. He was there with me. He was so excited that I said that he was shocked. We get back to Atlanta and we start, this is where he had to pay, in order to make a proposal, you had to spend $500,000, $500,000
crazy,
just to make the proposal.
I saw that.
And so we're doing that and we're going through this and we're saying this is impossible because all the others that are bidding on this are big companies that are operating in Europe already, and they've got the advantage on us. And there's 2 investment banking firms behind this, and they're expecting to get a big commission, and everything is against us. And the board at Harris, when I presented it to them, they said, there's no way you could win that, Wes. Why would they select you? Then you can't be high bidder. So how would they select you? And I said, we think there's a chance that they might opt for us because they know we would take better care of their employees and their customers. They might see that. We're going to try to show them that. They might be interested in that. They might be a board of directors. I'm kind of giving them another message here, if you will.
Sure.
Say there might be a board of directors who saw that as a value. And so we went back and thinking about the odds against this, I called the management staff together, and in the meantime, I'd been reading about prayer and fasting, and I talked about how God can do the impossible. So I asked them to join me in a time of prayer and fasting, and that was unprecedented. They asked me a lot of questions about fasting, about could they have any water to drink, asked
sure.
all the questions.
Sure.
And I gave them outlines about my ideas about fasting, and we did it. The group of men, some of these guys, we're not overtly practicing Christian principles, not all of them, but David Marini and I were. And so we had the time of prayer and fasting. The day came when we got the deal. It was purely an act of God.
Wow.
Because there was no way, from a practical point of view, you looked at everything you look at. If you did a Ben Franklin like we did in selling,
sure.
And you'd say, Lanier is not going to get this.
Yeah.
And so it was a big, big, big win. And it was a successful acquisition, although extremely, extremely difficult to manage because of the European laws. Yeah. And I won't get into talking about that, but just to say, if you think California has some weird laws, go to France.
Wow, yeah. Well, very
unbelievable.
I can't, very interesting story when they came back and said you were awarded the proposal, the deal, they said, we just felt like you would take better care of our people. And what a testimony to prayer and fasting and letting God take control of a pretty big situation, obviously. And that says, big. That says a lot though, Wes, too, about your, that message that they understood from you as the leader of the company at that time. You obviously projected very effectively that you cared about the employees. Talk about that a little bit, if you could.
Well, that's a big thing in the customer satisfaction that comes up is you begin to look at employee satisfaction as well.
Yeah.
And you can't be good at customer satisfaction unless you have a group of employees that have bought into the deal. And so you begin to study employee satation. It's really somewhat disheartening to do that because typically they grade you pretty harshly, and you don't like what you see, but you read it and learn from it, and you adjust your policies and do the right thing. And of course, a lot of things happen in business that are just not right internally, practices, and so you try to do everything you can to focus on making the employees happy, realizing that there are going to be some happy people you can't make happy. And they may need to change jobs, like the guy fired in Baton Rouge.
Yeah.
He was only going to be happy if he was CEO. And if he had been CEO, it would have been a disaster. Yeah. And and it was easy to see that. So we really spent a lot of time. And one of the things that we did is we did a lot of recognition in the company for somebody who did something above and beyond the call of duty for a customer. And I had this gold customer vision pen, expensive, that I would give to people who did things like that. Like one guy up in Canada gave up his weekend for a customer who was a lawyer. He had a crunch project that he had to get the copies out, and his copy was down. This guy goes and spends the weekend with the guy and gets him back in business. Yeah. We learned about that. And I go to Canada and made a video of the guy and praised him and gave him his customer vision award and put it right on his pen right there, and it went out to the entire company. I had this view that a company that really loves its employees needs to recognize them, even for small things. Yeah. So he spent a lot of money on plaques and awards. Yeah. And I made a crack one time at Harris Corporation. It didn't go over well. I said to the chairman, I have little respect for a company that doesn't spend as much on plaques as it spends on R&D. Can you imagine how that went over?
Now I know why plaques were such a big deal. Yeah, I mean, it was always, let's get the plaque, how can I earn the plaque? Yeah, so go ahead.
Exactly. We gave away hundreds of dollars worth of plaques. And I just thought it grew and grew on me because we did a lot with salespeople. We really blew a lot of smoke with salespeople. They got all kinds of awards and trips and everything. Sure. And what happened is we shifted to customer satisfaction. I think from an employee point of view, they liked it because in the past, everything they heard was what the sales force was getting and what kind of trips they were going on. And all of a sudden now, we're saying our real focus is on the customer himself. And by the way, when you serve him, there are a lot of nice things that will happen to you as well as the sales force. Understanding that nothing happens in this business unless something is sold. Yes. And so we've got to have a great sales force, and we've got that. But in addition to that, we want to have a great group of people who serve these customers as they deserve to be served, above and beyond the call of duty, called customer satisfaction, customer vision, seeing everything that we do through the customer's eyes with the idea of fulfilling every idea that they have about what they expected from us and exceeding it, exceeding all of their ideas. That's a loose definition of customer vision.
I mean, Wes, yeah, awesome. I mean, that's just so heartwarming. You grow an endearing, an endearing group of employees and associates as well through things like this. And I just think it's wonderful that as we're unfolding, your insights from the book and just your insights, and people are listening. I mean, constantly we're touching on integrity, humility, care, serving others. I mean, all these essential things that flow from your heart. Which is a godly heart to, it doesn't mean we're all perfect or you're perfect or I'm perfect, but, if it flows from there, it really flows into the business as well. And it's recognizable. There's certainly a large cachet of folks, myself included, that just, loved working for you. And when you have a person that's your leader. So young leaders, if you're listening, if you have a person that's your leader and these things are coming out of your heart, they're going to manifest themselves in actions. They're going to manifest themselves in that customer experience on the associate side and on the customer side. That's just, it's what we need today more than anything. So I really love this. Now, guys, again, the book I'm going to say is really interesting. Wes is in an elevator with his wife and he's trying to go to the top floor. And a lot of these, high-end hotels, you actually need a key, your room key, to get into the top floor. So, she says, Bernadine says, you get to the 9th floor, you got to take out the key and put it in. So Wes thinks, wow, from the shop floor, to the top floor, you need keys, right, to help you get there. And so, what we've been talking about here are some of the keys that Wes illuminates in the book. It's a short read, 134 pages. I highly recommend it. It's on Amazon. Again, we'll leave the link. But Wes, you mentioned something about the 4 characteristics of kind of prioritizing life. In order of their importance, can you kind of share what your formula is for the prioritization of life?
I'm flashing back to what I wrote. I can't remember what I wrote.
Well, God. It's kind of like the old Tom Landry one. God first.
Yes.
God first. Yeah. Family second. I believe you go into your children, your family second, and then your church and your ministry and work third and fourth. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, I thought a lot about that, and I remember we used to use those films from Vince Lombardi for sales motivation training.
Yeah,
and Vince Lombardi when he called in his team for the first time. And you remember what a tough coach he was and what a group of rascals he got together and built a team out of them.
Yeah.
He would say, this is a very simple business. There's just 3 things that I want you men to focus on. If you focus on those 3 things, we'll be in the Super Bowl. Just 3 things, okay? And that's how I want you to focus. He said, first is your relationship to God. And he said, secondly is your relationship to your family. And he said, and third, it's the Green Bay Packers.
There you go. There you go. Prioritize things right. Yeah.
I remember hearing that and thinking to myself, I may have put the Green Bay Packers in the number 1 position, and I shouldn't do that. But those priorities are really, really great for you to think about what you're really working for. Yeah. Who are you serving? What are you doing? Is your job just about making a lot of money? And I think that's what you were alluding to about my experience up in the World Trade Center. Being up there. Yeah. Being up there where a lot of money's flowing, and a lot of people are getting rich and not doing much to get it. Kind of makes you think,
I'm sorry, I forgot it. I mixed those stories up, folks. Yeah, that was a different story. By the way, working for you for a year and a half, I had the South Tower as one of my part of my territory. Yeah, and
wow.
Yeah, and so I spent a year and a half there. Leo McDonough at that time, I believe, had the North Tower. But what was interesting, I think out of all that was just I remember distinctly. I can still remember that World Trade Center. I can still remember the feel of the elevators going up. I just, I was in there so often. It just is one of those things that never, as a matter of fact, a local radio station here in St. Louis interviewed me about 9/11. And that's one of the things I said. I'll never forget that feeling in that elevator. But folks, switching gears here, back then, if you got a sales territory in New York City, you got buildings. Like when I first started in downtown, they go, well, okay, your territory is 11 buildings. I said, whoa, 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 time out. 11 buildings. Yeah. And then I got a promotion 2 years later. I got 7 buildings, Wes. They said, yeah, we're promoting you. You got 7 buildings. I said, how does that math work? I'm losing a tower from the World Trade Center and I'm only getting and you know what? Yeah, I made more money doing it. It worked out. So, you know, who was I? There you go. Submit to authority, right? Okay. If you tell me 7 buildings is a promotion, I guess it's a promotion. So it did work out. But you do mention, you know, the relocation 4 times as a family. I mean, that's a big thing for guys. I turned down a big interview in my life because it would have taken me to Tampa, and I probably, you know, I think I would have got the job. It would have been a great job working for VF. I would have been in charge of overseeing Major League Baseball and NFL football, global sourcing in the Asian hemisphere. It's pretty cool. But I didn't take the interview, and you know, I got interviewed on the phone and then they invited me down. I said no. And it was because I wanted to keep my family in St. Louis. So you relocated 4 times. Would you do that again if you had to, each one of those moves?
I would. They were all great moves. Every one of them was profitable, and we learned something new. And culturally speaking, where our children were being raised, the new environments, new churches, new groups of friends, it was very, very good for our family. And our children were very, I think the word they use now is socialized, because they had to learn how to make new friends in the places that we moved to. And so I would say I could actually see a purpose of the Lord in each of those locations, of spiritually speaking, of something he wanted me to learn. And where we went, we were in a different church, a different environment. And there was either somebody there that taught me something that changed my direction in every case. Wonderful, wonderful experience. So I would heartily recommend, for people who are looking at relocations, would be careful about turning them down just out of hand. I think right now, you know, if you're moving in the United States, there are some places I would not go. Yeah. I'm going to give you a list. But if you'd like to know, call me and I'll tell you exactly where I would not go. But you can guess where I would not go.
Yeah. All right. Absolutely. I can absolutely guess. So, well, thank you for sharing that. So what's going back to prioritization of life. So, you know, obviously, Wes, you're putting God first, you're putting your spouse second, you're putting your family in that third position. And you made an interesting comment in your book, which I'd love you to touch on. You realized at one point, as you had this shuffling of prioritizing life, or focus on prioritizing life, that you had to stop playing recreational golf. And you still played corporate golf, but explain for the listeners and viewers, what was the impetus of not playing recreational?
That is at a time when I think the key element in that is I went to this seminar and I got the idea that I was already CEO of something called a family. In other words, it was my responsibility, whether or not I did it with gusto or worked at it. It was told I was responsible. If you were looking for who you're going to pin the tail on the donkey, it was going to be me. And so from that, I discovered 2 things. First of all, I had put the Green Bay Packers at the head of the list. I'd put Lanier up there instead of my wife. And she was suffering as a result of that. And I could sense that. And I made a decision that I would spend more time with her and with the family as a result of that study. And that's where the giving up recreational golf, because back in those days, I loved golf. And if I played golf on Saturday, I was gone the whole week. And if I played golf on Saturday, I was gone another day. And they only gave me Sunday with the children. And Sunday, we spent half a day in church. You know, so I had a little bitty, not much time just talking to the children. So I stopped and I started working at home. We did projects, we did yard work. I worked with the children, particularly my son, and it was a good time. And even the kids today, my son particularly would mention that he noticed when I changed that direction. He remembers it. It was so important. Wow. It was during that period of time that I started studying the book of Proverbs with him. And Proverbs has 31 chapters, and you can do a chapter a day for most months. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing, because Solomon wrote that like a book of instructions for his offspring. Right. And it's beautiful, the thoughts are in there. and the ideas that are in there about your children, their relationship with other people. You don't want your kids to get in with the wrong crowd.
Yeah.
You know, the jailer here at Atlanta spoke at my Rotary Club, and he said, if we could figure out who the wrong crowd is, we'd have nobody in jail, because everybody in there says, the reason I'm here is I got in with the wrong crowd.
Yeah.
I went up and spoke with him afterward, and I said, here's my mother's phone number. She knows who the wrong crowd is. Because she was always saying to me, Wes, you don't want to get in with that family. That's the wrong crowd. I understood what she meant, but now I look back on it and say, she knew who the wrong crowd was, and she didn't want me dating those girls that came out of the wrong crowd, because she knew I might wind up marrying one of them, you know. So it was a very interesting time. But I really, at that point in time, I guess you would say, without getting a promotion, I realized I was already CEO of something that was my family.
Yeah.
I realized that I was responsible. In other words, if the family failed, I was going to be fired. Like the CEO, if you look at a company and the company fails, you know, they fire the CEO and they bring in a turnaround guy. And so knowing that, I put myself in that position. I decided, without bringing in a turnaround guy, I'm going to correct these behaviors. And giving up recreational golf was one of those things.
Well, you know, I'm so glad you said that in the book. I'm so glad you expanded on it now. You know, I remember, I'll never forget reading what Dr. James Dobson said about, you know, children from birth to 5 years old. It's not what they're taught, it's what's caught. They catch behavior. And I had a similar experience. My daughter, I loved college football. Long story short, we're on the floor one day. The college football's on in the background. We're playing a board game or doing something on the floor together, just me and her. And, you know, every time I finished my move, I'd watch the game and I wouldn't pay attention to her. And she said to me, and it floored me, she said, Dad, you're not paying attention to the game. Either you watch the football game or we don't do this anymore. I want to play with you. And Wes, I just broke down, and I never spent my Saturdays watching college football again, because what was my daughter saying? What did you say by not playing recreational golf anymore? It's what this is in today's society a lot, folks.
Yes.
Your family gatherings, time with your family, away from work. We have this in our craw, in our paw, in our hand. Way too often we're focusing on this. We're missing absorbing the time we have with the loved ones. And listen to what Wes said. His son never forgot that conversion where Wes stopped playing recreational golf and started spending more time with him. They catch that. It's important to them. It's important to the family, the nucleus of the family, the strength. So please, man, if you're, you know, because I see it too all the time, you know, put this away and absorb the time you have with your kids, so and your family. So just a couple more questions and we'll be done, Wes. But I by the way, hold up that coffee mug if you could. I saw that before. What is that mug there? Yeah, look at that. Lanier Business Products, Lanier Worldwide. Great. Wes, when I worked for you, I was in the thought processing division. I always thought that was a crazy thing. You know, you want to see me? You have an appointment? Who do you work for? I work for the Harris Lanier Corporation. I'm in the thought processing division. What is that? You know, but anyway, it's great. But you mentioned just you go to Bernadine you talk about Bernadine about the sixth sense that she had, that women have. Speak to that a little bit, if you could.
Well, if you read the Bible, it talks about when God created man, he realized he had created an incomplete creature. He said it's not good for him to be alone. Obviously, God knew that, but he said, so he created woman to fill up the blank spots in his life. So if you think about what that means, I think it means that men and women are very different, but the woman is designed to complete the man. In what ways does she complete him? And most of us resist the ways that she's designed to complete us. For example, I discovered that Bernadine had something called good business judgment. And I could talk to her about a business deal, and she would give me insights into it that I didn't.
Yeah.
She didn't have an MBA. She didn't have a college degree. How in the world does she know that? Well, there's nothing like godly intuition. Yeah. And so a woman does have a sixth sense. So a failure that we make a lot of times is not asking her opinion. For example, on investments, you could say, well, she never studies investments. She's not going to know she's going to make these investments. I found out the hard way that asking her for her help and advice on that was very, very beneficial. And she would give you, one time I was talking to a guy about a deal, and when we got in the car, she said, I hope you would never consider doing business with that guy. And I said, why is that? She said, during the presentation, you lied to me 3 times. It went right over my head.
Yeah.
It didn't go over her head. She had lights that flashed in her mind when that happened. And that particular deal, a friend of mine did the deal, bought the deal. I didn't buy it, but a friend of mine did, and he lost $300,000 as a result of it. So if you got a wife, treasure her. The scripture says, be good to her and love her as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. That's really saying you should be willing to lay down your life for her. That's big. That is really big.
That's real big.
And a woman will love you, and she'll do everything in her world for you if she's convinced that you will lay down your life for her. And so that's those are just a few techniques that'll help you in that regard. But it's a big thing. Forgive me for getting a little emotional. I'm still getting over losing my wife. I'm not sure I'll ever get over it.
Well, I'm our thoughts and prayers are with you. I know my wife for 39 years. I feel the same way about her, and I don't give her enough credit for having such great business sense too, but I couldn't imagine not being with her. So yeah, I know where you're coming from, and thank you for sharing that. I didn't mean to open up, the emotion, but it's okay, guys, to cry, right? I mean, we can show some emotion, but we can. So I read in your book that I guess every interview that's ever you've had, it seems like they ask you what's your greatest success. Yes. So I'm not gonna finish this interview by not asking you that. What do you consider to be your greatest success?
Well, it's real easy. I would just say in a word, it's my family. To have the kind of family that I've got today is a miracle in this culture. With 4 children who are all still following the Lord and are all doing good work, making a good living. They all got college educations. They have produced offspring who are also following the Lord, 22 of them. Of those, 16 of them already graduated from college. And by the way, because of my success at Lanier, I've been able to fund a lot of their college educations so that they finish college without debt, which is another big, important thing to me. For a kid to finish college with a degree and have $50,000, $60,000, $100,000, $200,000 debt hanging over them is horrible. So it's easy to say it's my family. And by the way, my family, of course, started with me marrying Bernadine. And if you ask me, what is the greatest thing Lanier ever did for you? You can think of a lot of things. He promoted me, gave me trips, paid me a lot of money. What's the greatest thing? The best thing they did for me is they moved me to Baton Rouge. And that was right after I cleaned boss's fishing tackle. And he called me in and told me he wanted me to go to Baton Rouge. I had a job offer from IBM, by the way, in my back pocket. Going to work for IBM versus Lanier is like going to work for Google versus Radio Shack. It's huge. So I get to Baton Rouge, and guess who's there? 18 years old, beautiful woman named Bernadine. I met her. A year later, we got married. She wrote in her manual that the first time she saw me, she loved me. Had to be with the Lord.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's great, Wes. Thank you for sharing that. And, what a special thing it is to see a man who had a relationship like that, so strong with his wife. And, we could only hope and pray for that for a lot of people these days. Well, as we wrap this up, I'm going to give you an opportunity. I mean, there are a lot of ex-Lanier people probably tuning into this at one point or another. Is there anything you would like to say to the ex-Lanier folks who are tuning in, who are listening, watching?
When we sold the company and I retired, I didn't have a real good platform to do what I wanted to do. But what I wanted to do is tell the employees how much I loved them and appreciated them, and what I really worked hard to provide a company that would meet their needs as they got older and they retired. And in selling the company, they might have thought that I was selling the company for some nefarious reason, but the reason I was selling the company is because as we spun off from Harris, we had this huge debt, and I could see that we were hitting the wall. And so instead of letting the company hit the wall and everybody losing their jobs, I decided that selling the company was best, and I thought we picked the very best a company to sell to. There were 5 prospects. I was the key salesman. I had an investment banking firm, but I took it as my role to sell the company to somebody who would provide jobs for our employees. So I loved all of our employees. And there's certain ones I had closer relationships with that I still have close relationships with. But I loved every single one of them. And I loved the customers and loved getting out there and talking to the customers and finding out what they thought about us. A lady in New York told me one time, she said, Mr. Cantrell, would you like to know why I buy all of my copiers from you? And I said, I sure would. And she said, because you got the only salesman that never lied to me. How about that?
Yeah, how about that?
So it just shows how that integrity and that truth and purpose really pays off. Wow. So yes, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to all employees and say, I love you. I appreciate you. I hope everything has worked out good for you. I think we invested in good retirement plans, so you're all taken care of, even though you're now, some of you with Rico, some of you with other companies. But the amazing thing is how successful all of you have continued to be using some of the principles that we taught you of good business.
Yeah. Well, Wes, thanks so much for sharing that. And the same question goes out to your family. And I mean, what would you like to say to your family? I mean, if anything, I mean, you have this forum. I mean, there's certainly going to be a lot of great grandchildren and future generations, hopefully as long as cyberspace is out there, listening to this interview. So what would you like to say to them?
Oh, my family. Well, I just appreciate your good behavior. I'm looking at people that I work with now and their children, and to think that we had 4 children that we sailed through college and everything without any problems at all that were even noticeable that I can recall. So I appreciate their obedience. They were all good students. I appreciate that. And they've produced a great crop of grandchildren, and they're following in the same pattern. And we got a much more difficult world now. My children grew up before internet and before everybody had a phone in their pocket. And nowadays those things are there, and they're not necessarily bad, but they have a lot of bad implications if they're not governed. And so I appreciate the fact that our family has done so well, and what a great pleasure it is for me to spend time with them. And to see my role now as a patriarch of a big family, which means I'm a provider and a protector of the family. So I would continue to do things as I see it in our family to protect them for their future. And most of them listen with an open heart to what I've got to say. I appreciate that very much. It's my job these days.
Well, that's great hearing that from you, and I'm sure they're tickled by hearing that as well. And Wes, before we close, just 2 more questions. The first question is there anything I forgot to ask you? Is there anything else you wanted to add to this interview that I failed to ask you?
I think we've covered the key things. I think the big thing to me was the cleaning the fishing tackle, because that was the beginning of my career. And it's one thing where if I hadn't done it right, I'd never had a career like that. Yeah. So you go back when you're my age, you think about triggering events where decisions were made that really changed your whole life.
Right.
And what would have happened if you hadn't done it? Scott, going to Baton Rouge, I wonder if I hadn't have accepted the offer to go to Baton Rouge, when all the common sense would say, don't go with IBM, stay home. I would have never met Bernadine, and we produced this fabulous family. And so that was a turning point in my career. And there were many other key turning points where you made a decision that maybe was kind of unpopular, or there was no written formula for it. But you look back on it now and you say, if I had gone, I could have easily gone the wrong way. And that decision would have changed my life, changed my career, would have changed my family. And you're grateful for those decisions. Yeah. And on those decisions, you try to figure ways so you can teach others about those decisions and the ingredients in those decisions and how to make good decisions. There's a load of that in that book. A lot of it in the book. A lot of it in my job today, working with the men's organization here at our church. We're just teaching young men about how to make good decisions and not just go with all the flow that's out there for the world.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I appreciate that insight. And, folks, just to close on this end, I can tell you firsthand that, I was failing at Lanier. I was almost going to get fired because I was not following the program that was laid out before me. And that program was laid out in a way where they said, Jeff, it's going to sound canned to you and your ears, but to the prospect, it's going to sound planned, and it's going to sound better than you think. And I didn't go with that flow. The minute I turned that leaf over and I started using the training, everything fell into place and everything worked. So books like yours are analogous to that, in that you give us keys to success. You give us insights to what really matters. And young folks, if you're listening to this, I encourage you to pick up on some of this, because integrity, character, humility, honesty, it means something. It definitely means something, and it matters.
You know, Jeff, the one thing that we didn't specifically comment on is the subtitle of the book is Releasing the CEO Within. And in writing this book, I'm saying to the public who reads the book, anybody, there's a CEO involved in everybody.
Yeah.
Because everybody is going to be in charge of something. You know, if it's just your life, you are the CEO. You may be the CEO, you should be the CEO of your family.
Yeah.
You might wind up being the CEO of the company.
Yeah.
But releasing the CEO means these principles will release the skills that you need to be the CEO of your life, your company, your family, whatever it is. And that was the idea of that subtitle of Releasing the CEO Within, that within everybody, there is a CEO. There's a responsibility and the ability to do that job.
Awesome. Thank you for clarifying that and illuminating that too. I appreciate that. Our last question, and before, I know I'll close after this last question, but at the end of every show, Wes, we ask our guests to pick an important song in their life that they'd like to share with the audience, and we'll put it up on the YouTube experience. It'll go up in our upper right-hand corner as it's a little card that appears. But out of all the songs out there, what was the one you picked that means the most to you that you like to share with us at this point?
Right now, it would be Center of My Joy. It's a song by, I think his name is Richard Smallwood,
okay,
who sings it. And it says, Jesus is the center of my joy.
Okay.
Everything good and perfect comes from him. That would be it today. I've got others, but that's the one I listen to every morning. Okay. I've got Alexa, you know, the only woman I've ever had that does everything I say. and she plays it for me while I'm still in bed in the morning.
All right.
So Jesus is the center of my joy.
Well, we will share that with everybody. And thank you, Wes, from all of us out there in Lanier Nation, and for Rick Diana for setting this up. I really appreciate the fact that he got us together on this. I know I speak for all of them when we say thank you so much for everything. Thank you for sharing yourself and your insights and your raw emotions and your, just your testimony and just valuable lessons that we could take away with us on our next professional adventure. And so for all the young folks out there, for all the future generations that listen to this, I hope you get something out of it. We'll put all the links up where everybody can find your books and your wife's books as well. From the Archway City to the beautiful Georgia Pines of Woodstock, Georgia, Wes Cantrell, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for your great leadership. And we just want to wish you all the best, sir.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It's been a real pleasure for me.
All right. Thank you very much. And you have a wonderful day. And folks, we will see you in 168 hours. Take care, Wes. Thank you.